Hello, hello. It feels a little strange to stop there, but otherwise it'll just keep going. So we're the Bail String Quartet. My name is Jason.
I'm Aviva.
Ryan.
And Sean.
And I thought, before I dive into what we're going to be going over with all this stuff, I thought it was worth mentioning this presentation. Really, actually, we are viewing as a conversation both amongst the four of us, but also with you. And I encourage you. I'm going to be asking questions along the way. My guess is maybe the best method to deal with that is, if you have something to offer in these scenarios, just unmute yourself and say it. And the reason I say that is otherwise, if there's a typing thing, there's usually a delay and a lag, and then we'll miss something. And if it turns out to be way too chaotic, then we'll rethink. But definitely, please, we want to be hearing your perspectives and opinions about all of this stuff, because as you're going to find as we talk about all this, 90% of this is subjective. And that's kind of the point of what we're talking about, and what we'll be talking about. Okay, so, whenever we have these presentations, it's always the conversation, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to do? And this year, I had a fresh perspective. And the reason I had a different perspective is I've met with so many composers, long before we saw these pieces. And I started noticing patterns in the sorts of things that I found myself talking about with those of you who I met with. And I thought, you know what? Let's dive into those really specific things. We're going to take a few of these things apart, and then at the end we'll sort of tie things together and have room for questions for more specific things. But let's dive in a little bit. The first thing I want, let me take a tangent. Does anybody here know the piece we just played? You know? Anybody else? Any guesses? Any guesses of who wrote this piece? No guesses. I am totally shocked.
Pamela Z said it sounded like Philip Glass.
Okay. You're exactly right. It's Philip Glass. This is not a new work or anything. This is written, a little over 30 years ago. We played it, performed it recently, and really like it. It's 3 movements long, and a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about conveniently can be looked at in this quartet. The first thing I want to talk about is voicing. Now, I'm not going to blow your minds with this. Anybody there? Everybody knows what voicing is, but I want to define it anyways, and then we're going to dive into that and how it applies here. So, I think of voicing is in a way that it's how, like, a musician or a composer or sometimes a group distributes or spaces notes and chords on one or more instruments. Oh my gosh, if that doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay. We're just going to show you some examples. And we're going to keep it very simple. I want us to play just a C major chord in a very basic spelling, lower register for us, root over there on Ryan. And we're just going to listen to what this sounds like. Okay, now here's our challenge is, as much as we can, I don't want us to change dynamic, timbre, anything else. We're going to try to really control the things we change. So one more time, here's that chord. It's a pretty standard spelling. We see this a lot in string quartet writing, and I think the reason is it's pretty, right? I'm going to change something, but I don't want any of you to change something. My note is going to be the same, but here's what it'll sound like. Now, again, I'm not blowing anybody's mind here, but I changed one note, and to me this is like crazy, the difference in sound. Yeah. This is sort of the point of what we're talking about, that the way you voice something really, really has a huge impact. If you think about it, so far we haven't changed dynamic, character, articulation, anything like that. Intonation, hopefully. We changed one note, the range it's in. One note. And, it's really kind of amazing. Let's try a couple other examples, and then we're going to dive in a little bit. Let's go... can we switch you to the third?
Sure.
Let's try that. So this is number 3. Now everybody everybody here is probably thinking, oh, big deal, that's just a first inversion chord. But I have to tell you, and we're going to, one thing I forgot to mention is I really want everybody here to realize what we're trying to give you is the perspective of the performer. How does that feel to you?
It completely changes how it sounds.
For sure.
I think kind of what you're talking about is voicing from a compositional, conceptual standpoint is one thing. I don't know that as performers we think about it as oh, here's this first inversion. Yes, I'm aware that it's that. It's more that, oh my God, here are the things that changed. Resonance, quality, harmonics that are here, overtones that are here, how I have to blend with my colleagues, and most importantly in this case, intonation for me.
And I'm so glad you said that last one, because actually that was just the one specific thing I wanted to touch on, which is, how long have you been playing viola?
As long as we've been a quartet.
Oh, that's really unfair. How long have you been playing the cello?
Oh gosh, it's more than 20.
Okay,
Yeah.
so more than 20. How about you?
25
You get the
years.
point. I've been playing for like 36 years. Yeah, I know it's old, or 35 years maybe. But still, besides all that, and we've been playing together 6 years. Like at least 60% of our time is spent on intonation. Would you say? Is that fair?
Easily.
Yeah.
It's the hardest thing, and I think it's the hardest thing about our instruments. As soon as we have Ryan on the third there, the way that we approach intonation totally changes. Suddenly we have to think, okay, well, we tend to prefer intonation for our group, where our thirds are a little bit malleable, right? So now you're the lowest voice in our chord, and it just opens this entire can of worms. I heard someone, I don't remember the quartet now, some quartet say something once about the Ravel string quartet, and they said it's the most out of tune scale you'll ever play. And this is sort of what they mean. It's not just a scale. It is literally just a scale, but if you're trying to tune every single chord along the way, it's so much more complicated. The only reason I say any of this is because, again, I think it is helpful to always consider what your performers are doing or what you're asking them to do. And that doesn't mean don't do it. It just means it's valuable to know that. Anybody have anything else about this spelling? This type of spelling?
Can we actually show a little bit what we're talking about? Can we play ones where we're all aiming for just even intonation, equal tempered intonation,
Okay.
with Ryan on the third, or the third and the lower?
Okay.
That has, did you see Aviva's eyebrows go up? That is like, okay, so now Ryan's going to temper it. So purposely staying away from any technical terms, I felt my body do this. Just kind of sink into the sound. But then I noticed how my C was ringing differently with Aviva's, I believe. So here's the practical of us playing these things. It's not that... Just to hear the difference.
And then the other thing to keep in mind, if the next chord, Ryan continues his E, but let's say we move to the key of E, we're now in this conundrum of, well, do we keep the E the same and everybody just play a little bit lower on our next pitch, or do we move the E? You see where we're going with this.
Because if we keep the E the same, then we're in an E major chord that is a number of cents low.
Yeah.
Versus changing the E and getting back to...
I think we're going down a very long rabbit hole here, but I think the greater point is that. Let's try, I wrote a few examples here. Let's try number 4. So this time we're really... Okay. Two things are changing here. One, now not only do we have doubling of the fifth, but it's actually 3 voices, and in order to fill the gap, there's a chord in my part in order to fill
Oh,
it.
so you have a double stop.
Right.
The rest of us are a unison.
Yeah.
Got
yeah.
it. Can we hear that again?
Yeah, sure. Can we try something once? I don't know if you can remember all the ones that we just did, but let's go all 4 in a row.
Okay.
We just started an early Mozart quartet.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, exactly. And it's just all the same. It's the same pitches. It's not rocket science, but it's crazy to me how much it changes the sound. Okay, I want to try something a little bit now farther out there, which is let's do some. Can we all change the octave once?
Okay.
So
Sir,
let's play the original one more time.
Okay.
Sorry, the wrong one. And then now let's take it up an octave.
Oh.
Up an octave. Can you do an up an octave? Hey, you get the point. Yeah, all the same chord, but they're not. You know what I mean? They're not. They're so different.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
This is I did not expect this, but when we played the second one, I was like, oh my god, it's the beginning of the Schubert Quintet.
Oh.
And it's really like a sensation thing. It's like I'm sure it is, and I'm sure it's voiced like almost exactly like that. So it really does like affect things, trigger things. There is like a there's more than just this is a C chord.
Let's try one where we're spread. So quite
Like
low,
a big range.
quite high,
Yeah.
and then fill in the gaps. So there's an example where we're quite spread, that when we started quite close together. Why am I talking about all this stuff? It's mostly because I think as I was working with a lot of composers, we talked, and I got questions about voicing. I think in some ways, the like you said, the theory of it is so simple that it's overlooked. But I think it's actually an incredibly valuable and useful tool, especially if you're looking for a specific sound, if you want to bring someone to some sort of unique sonic world, someplace special, or maybe I hate to say boring, which is valid. Anything like that. And
also, especially if you're doing contrapuntal or part writing, knowing that, I mean, if you're in an orchestra, for instance, if you're writing for an orchestra or even a string orchestra, you can put a lot of people in a similar register, and just by nature of how a section sounds, it's going to really stick through. We're 4 individual players, so if you're writing complicated part writing, it makes sense to be aware of the ranges and the voicing that we can cover, because that's going to take care of clarity. You're letting us be a mixing board much easier just by how you're voicing, as opposed to just the content, and then having to be finicky with dynamics to try and get something to cut through.
I'd love to mess with that a little bit with the beginning of the glass.
Sure.
So just from rehearsal 1 to rehearsal 3, we have these chords. Let's play it once just to refresh our ears. I'm curious, to anybody who's really thinking about what we just talked about, how would you describe how Mr. Glass has voiced this for us? This doesn't even have to be a technical answer. This could be, a character. If you feel a certain character as well.
I'd say very thick.
Thick. I heard.
Thick, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think it sounds very rich, so you have the nice low harmonics of the that the lower cello and everything, and it sounded smooth too. Like the transitions were really effortless.
Yeah, and it's funny because the first two words I heard are actually words that I think in my head before I even play this. Rich and thick.
And it's funny
That's
because James mentioned that. Ryan, can you play your first note? So Ryan is in the kind of the mid range of his instrument, and here's what I play for the first 5 notes. So I'm on the lowest note of my instrument. So even just that is already an interesting use of texture. That I'm at the lowest end of my instrument, but Ryan and I are in very similar areas, even though he still has a long ways to be able to go.
Could we try something? Could the two of you move up and register? Play the same notes. If you need to leave out a chord or something, that's fine.
Yeah.
If possible, keep them in. But
Yeah.
okay. actually
was
really trippy,
cool.
wasn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I have some questions for you, but let's try something else. Let's you and I go back to your original registers, and let's you and I move up.
Mhm.
You know what's interesting about that spelling is it feels more, let's say, 20th century music standard. We find these types of voicings often in string quartet, which is also why I think the way he wrote it is super great. It feels different. How about for anybody listening? We just played the same chords, same passage, hopefully in similar ways, but we changed the registers that they were in and that we were in. How does that affect your experience as a listener?
I felt that the first one to me feels deep is how I would have said it. And that the reason why I use the word deep as like water deep, because the second one feels thick because you're all right next to each other, like squished. And then the third one is very wide, much more open, you know. So depending on the voicing, I feel like you get a sense of the color into it, you know. So that's how it felt. Each one of those. First one was deep, second one thick, third one wide.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and then sort of to give away a future topic we're going to go over, obviously, the register that we end up having, in this case, this is definitely going to affect so many other parameters. The timbre we use, the type of sound we use, the type of vibrato we use, all that stuff's all informed by that as well. Stuff that we'll sort of cover as we keep going. Anybody else want to try any other versions of that, or is that you good?
Go on.
Let's go on. Okay. I just want to briefly mention something about.
Can I say?
Oh yes.
You know, I mean, this is something I'm so glad that you're talking about. This is something that I think about all the time and talk to students about quite frequently. I would point out that our experience here on Zoom is not the real experience. These kinds of voicing decisions, you know, even if you voice the chord the same way, should I have this note be the cello or the viola? Are much more. I mean, they're still subtle, but they're amplified in the live concert experience. So I think that if we were sitting in the room with you, these differentiations of color would be much more vivid. And so you know, and I would also point out, and you know, this is soapbox time. You know, my students hear me blab about this all the time. None of these things that we're talking about exist in Finale or Sibelius. When you are doing, and this is one of the problems, when you're making like voicing decisions. So you know, and you're relying on playback from your computer. It's just not gonna tell you anything. Switching violin 1 and violin 2 on the computer does nothing. Zero. In real life, however, there is a difference. And so you know, I just want to point that out. I really encourage people to be thinking, using their inner ear, because that's going to help you make these decisions more than the.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, to your point also, you know what's really funny actually is I had a typo on one of these. I just sort of wrote out the letters that we would play in what order, and in one of them I had reversed Sean and Aviva's parts, and so you'd switched for one of them, and so that was the only change, and that did make quite a big difference to the point where Aviva said, "Wait a second, this is so different than the other one," and then I said, "Oh, I had a typo." So yeah, even something like that, and that is always a question for me: is how much subtlety is lost through this. It sounds like each of them sound so different to me in here, and about I know a lot of that's the resonance of the room and each other. And
First off, hi Lansing, it's nice to see you.
Yeah.
What we were talking about is we all know our music theory. Hopefully, we could talk about theoretically what's happening. We could break down an analysis, but at the end of the day, when we're playing, it's a feeling, and that feeling comes, I think, mainly with voicing stuff comes to resonance. When we're changing the voices, it's changing the resonance. And if you want to experience it, if you're not, if it's been a while since you played an instrument or sat in a chamber ensemble, go to a tunnel and say ah, and see how it makes you feel and how you want to keep talking. Then go to the most heavily carpeted small room you can find and do the same thing. And I think you'll, depending on your personality, if you go, ah, you'll either feel like it's too loud or it's too soft, and it's going to influence how you feel you should say that next word. And that is, in a way, is what voicing is doing for us at the most, non-technical level, the most, I can't think of the word.
Intuitive?
Thank you,
Yeah.
intuitive
Yeah.
level.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, especially if everybody was in this room, I feel like you could spend a whole lecture just on this, but let's keep moving to get to the other two. I did want to briefly mention our other definition of voices that we tend to use, which is like, I'll very dryly say, like the simultaneous vertical placement of notes in relation to each other, which is a really complicated way of saying how many things are happening. Let's just play something and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Can we play rehearsal 3 just to 5?
Sure.
Okay, so the question that I have for you is, how many voices are there? Anybody?
Are there 8?
8?
Yeah, sorry, this sounds crazy, but like
Oh, I wanna
well,
hear it.
the cello's got like the cello's got one line, yeah, but then the viola and violin two each like are pulsing between two different notes, and the violin has like 3 notes in a triad or something like that, yeah.
This is why. So sometimes when I say something, hey guys, I'm gonna ask what they think about this, and then they look at me like I'm crazy because I'm gonna get, well, duh, it's gonna be this answer. This is why I like to ask it, because I think as anyone who's not looking at the page could get all sorts of different experiences, and any of them are valid. Let's play. You're right. I want to play
Let's
it one
do
more
it
time,
again.
and then we're gonna talk about that.
What do we do?
Same thing. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what we see on the page. We all are playing the same exact thing in octaves or unison. So, like if you were asking me how many voices I think there are, to me there's one. There's one melodic voice. But I also know it's not that simple. So to what you're talking about, James, that's so fascinating. Is that James?
Might I suggest, instead of saying the voice that you're talking about,
Yeah.
how many things are happening?
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing happening. We're all doing the same thing. Right? Is that
Sure.
similar?
Yeah. Maybe if I asked someone on the other side to sing what you just heard, they're going to sing this melodic line, right? I mean, I know it's a loaded thing, and there's a lot more to it than this, but that's sort of what I'm getting at. That's really interesting. Anybody else have a different experience?
For me, when you played that way, it almost transformed your string quartet sound to an organ patch. And so I kind of heard like one sound, but it was a specific like organ stop, you know?
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
We've actually talked about
We
that
have,
before, haven't
yeah,
we?
yeah.
That specifically.
For us, when we get a particular resonance that we're going for, we actually just call it the organ sound. Because we're obsessed with that sound as a quartet. It doesn't always have a place, but when we can use it, we love it.
And that's the sort of question I have. I wonder how much of that is lost in here.
Yeah.
But in any case, yeah, this is. I mean, again, I don't want to stick too long to each of these,
Yeah.
but it is interesting how much is going on into each of these things. I want to ask you three. Oh, sorry.
When you said how many voices there are, I mean, it's a little bit tricky because it's also a matter of semantics and what you mean. So, how many voices and how many lines, and then how you're defining lines are not the same thing, right? A
Sure.
cello suite has one voice, and yet you can analyze all of them as four voice chorales. So, is it one voice or four?
Right. And this is actually, again, why this conversation is important, right? Because probably each of you have a slightly varied answer as well.
We could play it like more than one. We've decided to play it like one. Right? Is that
Sure.
anyone? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. I wanted to ask you three about, okay, when you see this, when I see a passage like this in a score, I know my brain goes certain places right away. What is your experience playing something like this?
Oh, playing it.
Yeah.
Just specifically 3 to 5, what we've been working on right now.
A passage like this. Yeah.
Blend into the Ryan, but be with Sean.
Yeah. Blending.
I think.
Yeah.
Intonation.
That's the first thing I think of too. Is oh my gosh, it looks so simple. This is so much harder than anything else in this entire quartet. This passage right here. It's the hardest. It's the hardest part.
I
And-
open up the score and well, that's another 2-3 hours of work. Just because it's now in unison yet.
And so this all the point I'm trying to make is you could argue this is simpler and in general for us simpler often means
More exposed.
more difficult in a different way, right?
Although I will say, experientially, from 3 to 5, because of the differences in the register, when we're playing it, it sort of feels like it does when we're playing harmony, even though the notes and the pitches are the same. If we're all exact unison, I think the passage would behave differently.
And the other thing is, since we're outlining chords, you could still hear, you still
for
hear the
sure.
chords and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Let's move on to 5, rehearsal 5 to 7. So we're playing essentially the same line, but now we've split apart. We're filling up those chords. What is it? Does it change? How does it change your listening experience when this moment happens? We're going from one line or one melodic line, we're all in unison or octaves, to suddenly splitting up. Is it impactful or not a big deal or?
I think it's impactful. Even if you look at it kind of, I find it interesting that you say one voice, because I always think sometimes about frequency. If you're playing in octaves, then objectively there's 2 voices at minimum. So here, because we've increased what may sound like 2 voices, actually due to octaves is more frequencies. So in a way, what I always love about Philip Glass is that while the texture may be built on the same idea, so your brain can kind of go into a mode of following, and at the same time the frequency and the way the flower, or whatever imagery you might have, is constantly changing.
I started losing that at the end there. Could you hear okay? Or?
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly like you said. What is
Sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. It sounded like you were talking and then slowly someone was fading you out. But we know. Let's move. I know I have some more things we could talk about. Let's actually just keep moving for now. Let's try 7. Rehearsal 7 to 11.
Yes, that's great.
So this is we're just sort of following the trajectory of the piece here. The first time I heard this quartet, I remember that moment and being like, what? I was not expecting that after all the other stuff. Of course, that's, my experience. What's going on here? Anybody have a thought on what's happening?
Is the viola doubling the cello just pizzicato? So for me, that kind of like makes that like compounded. It sounds like one voice, you know, um, and not like two anymore.
Are you guys in the same octave?
No.
No.
Are you playing the
Same
same
notes,
number
though.
of notes?
No,
No.
almost.
So you're punctuating almost all of them,
Yeah.
right? It's a really interesting sound, isn't
Yeah.
it? Meanwhile, let's play what we have. So we sort of split off into pairs, right, in terms of function, right?
It sounds so tonal and happy on its
Yeah.
own.
So that brings up another thing. The fact that suddenly we're playing in two different keys after all those consonant things before, to me, is part of what is so jarring. You know, even though, you know, polytonality is definitely not new, and this isn't particularly complicated. It's just in the context of it feels like it.
It's
Anybody
really
have any-
creepy. I like it.
Oh, creepy.
Yeah, it feels like when we were suddenly ripped out of the security of that tonality in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Let's go to the next thing. Let's play from 11 to, let's go 17. Okay, you get the idea what we're sort of what's happening here. We're sort of taking this apart. What is your what am I trying to say? What do you think when you suddenly get to this section as a listener? What do you notice?
I think it's interesting, somewhat similar to the common tone. He's choosing to adjust one element by section, and then you keeps common tones of texture, of element, of line, of tonality, and it's somewhat of a recipe, I think, and it is, I think, a lot about tension and expectation and lead. You know, he's leading you, but also changing things. It's very decisive, I think, in a lot of ways. But I'm just sitting pondering the common tone, almost thinking about it in a different way, that there is like common tones of compositional elements, you know?
Yeah, that's a cool way of thinking about it.
'Cause
like
this is
minor
all-
common tones.
Yeah. This is all intervallically the same, you know, you're doing the same intervallic motions, and that's homogeneous, but then, you know, whereas we just broke from this bi concept where you had these two things going on, you know, and so now you're all one. But that's not the interest point. The interest point is the surges over, you know, the 3 measure or 2.5 measure sections, you know. So he's also playing with what is interesting. You know, it's like, oh, this is really interesting about these 4 measures, but I only really have to change this one thing to get there. Oh, I'm in a completely different thing that's interesting, but I only have to change one thing to get there. You know, it's really interesting, really interesting to think about that way.
Yeah,
For me
you know, we
personally.
really only played. We didn't even get halfway through this movement, and that's really what keeps happening throughout the rest of the movement. We end up highlighting the same chords. We're often in the same registers, and then some switch is you know, change for one of us. Sometimes more than that, for example, 7. But
Right. And I think you find two things there. I think one, you find a through line. You find a way to connect to the piece, to learn the piece. You find what the piece says through that kind of through line of analysis and interest in listening. But then you also find, I think, a compositional source. I think maybe that was where his intrigue and his process and his, I don't know, I think that's where maybe his source came from, maybe in this piece specifically, or just maybe could you comment on his style, more so. But I think it's a really interesting conversation. I think a really interesting way to open the door as far as musical analysis, performance, and composition, like throwing them all in one big cocktail, which is why I'm appreciating this presentation. So thank you.
Before we should move on to the next thing because it's already.
Yeah.
Let's do something.
Yeah.
So in terms of, I don't want to get tied up in the semantics of what's a voice and what's not. We're trying to outline for you guys how we might approach something as a performer. Let's play from the beginning until 15, no repeats. And I'm going to outline for you from our perspective how we're approaching voicing in terms of how to make decisions about how to play it. It starts as one thing, these chords that spread out over a thing. Then it goes to, again, one thing. We're all playing the same line.
Same chords from before.
The same chords from before, but now it's arpeggiated and we're all doing the same notes. Then it opens up to two things. Now Jason and I are playing in octaves, and Ryan and Aviva are playing in octaves. So now we've gone back to two things. Then he goes on to open it up even more, where Ryan and I are a thing, and Aviva and Jason are a thing, but now orchestration is being played, and that my pizzicatos are just accentuating or adding a new color to what Ryan is doing. And then finally, we get to rehearsal 11, which I know means nothing to you because you have the score, and we get back to this single texture idea that we come back to the same chords from the opening, and this is all introduction, in a way, to set up what the movement's going to do. So let's just play that. This is just a way to outline how we might think about it in terms of
No.
voice.
No,
No
which
repeats.
means you have to adjust the bowing because it'll be backwards.
Okay.
And the reason to outline it this way, it's really easy to get tied up into the concept or the definition or the compositional idea, but it has to go through the filter of how we're going to interpret and how we're going to look for a way to make one section move from organically and try to make it have a shape. So.
Okay, and then I want to talk briefly about the second thing, let's say, that kept coming up was timbre. Timbre is an interesting thing. I don't want to spend quite as much time on this one, but it's worth talking about. Tone quality, we often in rehearsal will say tone quality, tone color, things like that. It's the perceived quality a sound has, or musical note has, or sound or a tone has. It's what makes our instruments sound different despite producing the same pitch frequencies. We're going to start finding as we talk about these things, it's quite closely related to the aspects we've already been talking about. But we're going to look at the third movement of Philip Glass for this. But actually, before that, let's do a really basic example. Let's recall the original C major chord. Can we play that again? Now, let's try something without trying to change any other parameters. Can the two of you play those notes on another string? I'm not sure how much of that it goes through here, but my experience playing it is, whoa, that is quite a different color, quite a different sound quality, and would definitely affect, I think, how we play it.
Okay.
The most obvious, what we're talking about here is just changing strings for the same notes. We see this a lot in violin music and in quartet with directions from a composer to play something on a certain string. And I think that even certain qualities or decisions we make get tied to that, just maybe through common requests, right? Let's try the beginning of Philip Glass' third movement, and then we'll tie this in. Good. Just to take it at its most basic level, and let's not make it too complicated. I'll just alter it in my part. In the first violin part, essentially, we just have a D minor scale happening here. The way we played it is the way we have decided to play it when we perform it. But I want to try something once where I'm just gonna let everything be on the D string. Can we try that once? Okay, and then let's try again. This time I'm going to let the same everything be, but I'll play it over on the G.
Everything on the G?
Yeah.
For you.
For me, yeah. Okay, so same notes, same pitches, hopefully similar dynamics and all that. Different string. What if anything, changed for you? For the people listening. Anything? Maybe it doesn't come through. That's the sort of thing where it's hard to tell.
When you switched to the G string, the notes that were higher up on the string sounded thinner than they did when you had played them lower on a different string.
Sure, and that can make sense. The string is so much shorter at that point, right? And less resonant. It's funny, I had to really control myself to not start adding things that typically composers will want if I'm up there. And this is that sort of baggage. Even I sometimes will talk about that. Sul G, especially when you're younger, you just think, oh, it has to be loud then.
It's not just even what composers want, what the string calls for.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because
Yeah, you kind of need it.
if I play down here, that's a very long, loose string. If I play that here, it's a tighter, shorter string. That extra tightness needs a different use of the bow, which then makes me think I need to use the vibrato different. So it's funny how the same note, just written in a different timbre, can have a completely different character just because of physics.
Right. Yes. I think there are all sorts of tools we have for changing timbre. Obviously, there are some really obvious big ones. We labeled a lot of them: sul ponticello, sul tasto. I guess you could call vibrato use potentially. Technical things for us, like how much hair we use or how close we are to the bridge, the weight and the speed of the bow. All of things are these micro adjustment that create these huge differences in sound. And also the less obvious thing, like our two violins just sound different, even when we play the same things. So all of these things, I think, are different ways of controlling the timbre. How important do you three think it is to know what a composer is after in terms of timbre.
It's like an incredible question. Because, I mean, there's plenty of stories where, well, composers have said to us many times, well, I didn't know that was in my piece that I wrote. You know, I hadn't imagined it that way, but, you know, that also works. So, I mean, sorry to get into semantics again. I'm going to forget the word important, and I'm just going to say, if there's information there, it's really helpful. If it's not, I'm going to try a lot of different things and come up with my favorite way. And I'll push myself to think outside of the box if it seems like the music suggests it. Yeah.
We talk about this a lot, actually. A lot of the time, the most important thing isn't so much what exactly the color or timbre or whatever it is that each of us are thinking, but more so that we agree and, if it calls for it, match on a certain timbre, which will naturally give like a more unified concept, both in terms of character, and then that will directly translate to what each of us do what we need to do in order to make that come across. Sometimes we want exactly the opposite. We want it to be like, you're doing one thing, we're doing another thing. But in terms of the level of importance, I think the execution of something coming across is pretty heavily dependent on agree.
So, like, if there's more information, it helps us find the same thing
Faster.
Like, somebody could say, oh, play this at 84, or somebody could say 84 and add the word lazy. You know, that's going to be two totally different
For me,
ways
it's
of
hugely
84.
important.
Yeah.
When you guys write a piece, it's not done. It goes through our lenses. And this goes for anyone who's writing a piece now, or if I get a thing that just happens to be by someone named Beethoven, it's all the same. What's on the score is what we can go with. Based on how it's written, how the voicing is done, what they're telling us to play or not play gives me information as to know how much they're looking for out of their piece. Everything else is fair game. Our job is interpreting that, is taking what's on the page and finding a way to have that be the most expressive version of what's there. All of the markings that exist beyond that are either giving us hints to go towards one place or limitations to not go towards someplace else. So without any of those limitations, anything is fair game in terms of what we can try to make happen. So in that sense, I think it's important. Because if I see someone who's marked Jason Sul Ponticello at the same time they've marked Ryan Sul C, all of a sudden I know we're working with a very wide range of timbres, because we're going to have very thin, very crystallized, very high frequency against very warm, very thick. Well, that tells me that this composer's looking for something very specific. Now, if I open a page that happens to be Beethoven, even if I don't know it's Beethoven, what do I see? I see very motivic writing that's spread perfectly, that's chord-based, but there's also direction. Obviously, this motive connects here, this connects here. All of a sudden, the timbre there is maybe less important than bringing out what's actually happening in the page, which can be done with a variety of different timbres. So even before I ever play a note, based on what I've seen in the score, I already have an idea if what I think this composer, how important something like that is to them or not, and I'm making decisions then about what to do as a player.
Let's try something. Sean, can you think? Let's play the opening.
Yeah.
The goal is we keep it still in piano.
Okay.
But give us a specific type of sound or sound quality that we're going to try to just figure out right now.
Sure.
So, verbally or non-verbally? I guess we'll figure out.
Non-verbally.
Non-verbally. Okay.
Okay, now a different one. Okay, now a different one. Okay, now a different one. If you think of dynamics as a decibel level, then not all of those are piano. If you think of dynamics as an intensity, as a character, those are all piano. And those are all technically fair game based on what's on the score here as well, in the part here. And they're all very different. And they're all done through different techniques. but it's about finding a match and blended sound, because we've decided that we want to blend and we want to match.
And for right now, it's very technical. I mean, before you play your first note, I'm trying to see where you are on the bridge, how tilted your bow is. But I think that if we were working on this, and let's say rather than we were just trying to guess what you had, we saw ghostly, I think then we would all be thinking of it differently. It's not all just do the technical things you're doing. It's what can each of us do to bring that out, and then we'll try to find something common between them. And you're right. Any of that's fair. Any of that could be fair, right? Yeah. Okay. I guess we're losing track of time. I should move on. Okay. You know what? Let's play this excerpt. Let's play from the beginning, but go all the way until, let's go to 12. We're going to use this actually as a segue to the next larger topic, but I think that while we're playing, think about those things we were talking about. So we're talking about voicing and the registers we're in and timbre and all of that. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit and use this as an example, talk about articulation. Again, we actually do have entire presentations just on this for Quartet, so we can't get too deep into it, but I wanted to at least go over a few general things just because they kept coming up in the conversations I had with composers. I'm going to read this very, very dry definition first, and then we're going to throw that away and talk about it the way we think about it as performers. Okay?
Very dry.
So, the musical articulation, the musical parameter that determines how a single note or other discrete event is sounded. Articulation structure an event's start and end, determining the length of its sound and the shape of its attack and decay. They also modify an event's timbre, dynamic, and pitch. We have names for many of them that we, over the centuries in Western music, we have sort of assigned to, at least loosely, right? And we're always seeing new ones, right? Maybe every year I feel like this person is using this thing, and oh, that's really neat. It's a new way of thinking of how this can be notated to get the sound that they are after. So let's talk about the glass in articulations. First, right off the bat, I'm going to sort of let the cat out of the bag. He writes none. I guess if you count as slurs in articulation, he does use slurs, but nothing else. He writes none. It's a clean slate, which is very interesting, I think, position to put us in when we're playing this. I also think it's why if I listen to various groups recording this movement, they sound so different. And I like, I think any of them can work. Any of them can work. What do you think of when you get a score like this as performers? Let's say it's new. I mean, we've been playing this, we sort of know what we like, but it's fresh. What do you think of?
For me, Mr. Glass has the benefit of being known. So he can skip a few steps. When I see it, I already know there's thought behind it, there's purpose, and boy, I need to dig in. There are things that I can see in a score or not see that would either lend me to think this person really wants a clean slate and exploration, really wants it simple, or this person doesn't know what they want at all. And it's a fine line when you don't know a composer or you don't know their style. In this case, to skip steps because we know it's Glass, it is, to me, it's an added responsibility to figure out what is here that we can pull out that doesn't leave what's on the score, but also brings something to it that I think is intended by the composer.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I also want to mention that we've been doing this for, is it 6 or 7 years? I forget. I've been doing this since the first year of the festival. I think one of the hardest things about it is because one of our goals, or at least one of my goals, I don't want to speak for everybody, is I'm trying to capture what I think and hope each of you are giving to us. And I'm getting the information from the score without knowing you. Now this year is different, which is interesting. I'd love to talk to you about that, Elizabeth, in the future. But generally, we don't know you, we don't know your music, and that's, like you said, we don't have the benefit of like this catalog of ways that you would play this person's music.
Or trust.
Or, yes.
Which is huge. That's a completely different topic.
Different topic, right. But that often is what we're spending a lot of time exploring, is those sorts of things. And a lot of it's guessing, a lot of it's informed by the other things we see in the parts. It sounds silly, but I know that sometimes when I talk to you, when I finally talk to you about the pieces, I'm often asking you what instrument you play. There are reasons for that. A really great example is the tenuto mark. We've already talked with a few people on here. If you ask an oboe player, if you ask a string player, if you ask a pianist, you're going to get very, very different definitions of what they think that is, and none of them are wrong. I think it's fair to say we have this joke, but really, really, the one thing you can agree on is it means do something. Now that is, if you're a composer trying to use this as a tool, that's maybe not the greatest thing to hear, but it's just that is true and you can't really argue that. Everything else though, I'm not sure. Let's pick something once. I want to actually use this as an example to show some of these.
Yeah.
I'm not going to use a word, but let's say a marked type articulation. So it could be accent, sforzando, marcato, maybe even forte piano if you think of it that way, something like that. I want to start at 9, and let's all of us find something in that realm, something marked.
But not necessarily unified? Or you're looking for unity?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Alrighty.
It's interesting to hear how we were all making tweaks as we went and that sort of thing. I want to look for the extreme contrast. Let's do the opposite. So now some sort of smoother.
Sostenuto, sustain.
Yeah, it could be tenuto, or it could be a character word, dolce, whatever. Now, we sort of picked the two extremes here, I realize that, but if you came to me and you argued any of these, I'd hear you out. Meaning, I don't think any of this is completely off the table. Like you said, we're informed by what we know, Mr. Glass, but if we didn't, and if you really thought that this is what they're after, but they are so different, right? Not only different, I'm sure, to hear, but to play is so different. And again, with nothing marked here, it's just an interesting thing. Let's pick something where we do a combination. let's say for the more moving notes, ba da 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 da, let's say smoother, and for the longer ones, articulated, not necessarily short, but articulated. Can we reverse them? What do you think?
So each of these has just a different character, a different environment, a different world, almost instantly. And we could write down all of these articulations. There's a lot happening, but I like that we haven't necessarily said specifically what they might be. It's interesting.
Of course, we have specific techniques that are a lot more, well, I already used the words, but specific and actually sort of melt into the world of timbre as well. So, for example, Colegno or Bartok pizzicato and those sorts of things, all are another more extreme examples of that type of thing.
Now, I don't know about you guys. I'm using voicing and timbre to decide the articulation I'm going to use. Ryan, can you play for us at 9? The way you play it. Here's what Ryan has. Okay. Now here's what I have on my own in the same place. I'm going to refer to what Lansing was talking about. You could think of this, and I do think of it this way, almost as complex melody writing. I have 2 notes, but I think I am with Ryan, and I also think I'm that damn hi-hat or snare drum 1. So that means my first note is matching Ryan. My second note is rhythm, creating the impulse of an offbeat. So when we put that together, it sounds like this. Now, I don't really give a crap what articulation you call that. I can tell you exactly what it is. But it was not about an articulation. It's about, here's how this is voiced. Here's what I think the effect is. We know this is our first forte, so it's being influenced by that. And, okay, we've used all of these things that Jason's been unpacking to inform the decision of how to play it, and it's all for character and musical reasons. Now, of course, we have to have the ability to practice it and break it down, and we do. But the idea is that you've developed those enough as a performer that they don't get in the way. They don't encumber the musical idea first.
Okay, now I have a follow-up question to all of this, which is, now, if you get a score, and let's say it's this score, now you suddenly do have articulation markings. Does that change the way you're describing you thinking about it?
Absolutely.
In what ways?
Same way of, I hope all of you have had this experience. If not, find it. Sit in a group and play a C major chord, and then play a minor 4 chord and go back to tonic. There's something so powerful about a minor 4 chord, and it's a specific affect that you get. You can read about it, just like you can read about how to cook, but when you experience it, it becomes a different thing. Now when I open a score and I see the equivalent of a minor 4, I don't care if it's tonal or not, it doesn't matter. But if I see the equivalent of a minor 4, I already am entering this world of what is the meaning and the feeling behind that. Articulation is exactly the same way. If I opened this score and I saw that Mr. Phillip had put the same articulations that are the exact same way that I'm going to play it, I wouldn't be playing it the same way I'm playing it with those articulations. Because now they have a slightly different context. That dot might mean something else, and I need to explore that. So, yeah, it opens up just as many different cans, for me at least. Which is unfair for you, but, well, that's how it is.
Yeah, just to jump on a little bit more of that, I think for some people, this is maybe like a very liberating score to see. It's like, oh my God, we can just make all of the decisions in the universe. And for other people, it's like, oh my goodness, like, what do we do? Where do we even begin to come to some sort of like a conclusion about what? And I think different of us would say like, oh well, the harmony da da da, so we should do blah blah blah, and other people would be like, oh, but it's like it's the same for so long, so we should just like really go with that rather than like trying to create, and like that's kind of half the magic of it. But yeah, I think totally different approaches based on even like the performer that you ask. About like whether you see articulations or you don't, or like information even in general, like we were talking about timbre. If I don't see Sol G, I might still play Sol G because it just calls for it.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, I do want to mention that I think we all sort of have said this before. Either can work, meaning how you write it. Either can work, but you're just getting quite different things. All these things that Aviva was just talking about in chants, if you give more of a blank canvas, your potential for what you're going to hear back is just probably quite a bit wider versus hopefully if you have a lot more specific things. But even if you have, like, if you look at a late Mahler symphony score, the part's just full of stuff, you can still hear differences from orchestra to orchestra, how they're deciding to do those same markings, so it's...
And that can be interesting because it comes down to knowing what you want out of it. I think it's like that. I know some people who will love to say they love IPAs, but I see them order a PBR pretty often. I think it's a similar thing here. It's perfectly fine and poetic and beautiful to be able to say, I don't want markings because I want the performer to do whatever they want. And then you get in that first rehearsal and you start telling the performer, well, actually, this should be this and this. Well, then why didn't you write it in there? Right? So it really comes down to what do you want out of it? Our job is to pull out as much as we can with what we have here. And that's just it's not a pet peeve. It's just, I was thinking about it. Like, it's,
Sure.
if someone knows what they want, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's do it then.
Help us out. Help us out. Yeah. Okay, good. And these are the sort of we'll get into questions in a bit. What I thought would be kind of fun would be to play some different musical examples and then unpack these parameters.
Sure.
So the first one we're going to play is actually written by one of the participants today, Davide Tamaro, who wrote us a lovely piece in 7 movements.
This is number 2.
And this will be the second movement. Oh, I think I need to get it from back here. Now, just to prep everybody, we're going to ask about the things we've been talking about. So I think that listening for those things would maybe be a good idea.
So that's a blink with your whole face.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Is that from memory? Good job.
Some of it.
We had an emergency page turn situation. Okay, first of all, Davide, we love this piece. It's so great.
Thank you.
I thought it would be really neat to hear from you listening. What sorts of things grabbed you? What were the moments that you thought, oh, this is happening? Oh, this, and not. I don't even mean in technical terms. I just mean like, wow. Even just that. It doesn't have to be. Oh, you start in. I mean, it can be, but oh, you start in unison. It's the one voice thing. But I'm more interested in the experience.
In other words, not analytical dissertation, and I say that because I know you composers. But what is your experience as a listener?
I loved it. You could see the comments were saying it's a bop, it slaps, and I agree. It grabs you from the beginning, and it's like, yeah! It felt very metal. I loved it.
Thrilling.
You know, I have one thing that I thought was really cool, like an interesting experience to play, which is we have all this stuff. We use a lot of Sol G, a lot of there are a lot of accents in this part, a lot of articulations and sforzandos. I know I'm using technical terms now, breaking my own rule, but it's just yes, rock. To me, the most shocking and impactful moment in this entire piece is this. Right?
Yeah, and the fact that 10 seconds before the excerpt that you played ends, there's a complete change of sonority, harmony to consonants. That makes it. Because it's pretty easy to write like, aggressive, rock and roll that just goes on and on. But this, like, subtle changes or drastic changes in dissonance, consonance and dissonance, to me is what, I love that. So that was really cool.
And of course, that's blending a handful of the things that we were talking about together. Because if we see something that's rhythmic and more in unison, okay, this becomes about, I hate to use the term, a lot about articulation. We have to end notes together. We have to start notes together to get that impact. But then exactly as Lansing is saying, if we get to something that's all of a sudden tonal, now our brains have to go to balance, sound quality in terms of how we want to go. And the articulation also has a play there. So we're moving back and forth between all of these things that Jason was unpacking all the time, a lot of it instinctually, and a lot of it then we actually need to discuss. And that's all coming from what's on the page. In this case, Davide is wonderfully, you can tell when I open the score, this composer knows what he wants. He's looking for a particular color. He's looking for a particular world. And that's because of the right information that we have on the page. And so we can quickly get there. And then try to bring those things out. An example of turning an articulation, taking it away from the gross, yucky, technical definition of what an articulation is to the practical character. What is an articulation? I have this wonderful spot. Can we play 73 once?
Yeah.
Listen to the viola part. I mean, you always should, but. Okay, so the viola part is this. For the latter ones that you hear, I have an offbeat eighth note only with an accent. For the first three offbeats that I have an accent with a tenuto. Okay, now if I did not have those first three that had an accent and a tenuto, I might play the accented eighth notes like this. But because the first three of them have a tenuto, and then they'd stop having the tenuto, I interpret that as it needs to change. So it becomes... They're two completely different things. It has nothing to do with the actual length of the note. It has to do with the intention of the note. Now, I say all this, and that could be a mistake, but I don't think it is, because of how careful he has been with his other articulations. And that's what I mean with the word trust when we're talking about that. Because he has been so careful in how he's outlined things, when I see something like this, I don't think, oh, this is a mistake. I think, oh, cool, he wants something to change here. And that is the practical nature of using timbre and articulation to try and create a three-dimensional piece of art on our end as a performer.
Thank you for not thinking it was a mistake. It was not, but thank you for not thinking it.
Well, I have the same thing with you in pizzicato, and when you leave the tenutos, I'm a little like, what? So I've been cutting my pizzicato chords a little sooner when you take those away to match them. I hadn't looked at those particular bars in your part yet, so it's good to know that. All right.
I don't want to say the name of the next section, but let's move to the next section.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. You start alone.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Now, so this is still thinking about all of those same parameters, just applied perhaps slightly differently.
Okay, so a little bit of a curveball here. Who knows the piece, first of all? Anybody? Anybody know the composer? Is anybody writing?
No.
Don't tell them? Oh, okay. Aviva says I'm not supposed to tell you, so don't be mad at me. Mad at her.
Going crazy, I know I heard it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's start unpacking
Let's
it
unpack it
without
first.
saying
Yeah,
what it is.
great. First off, this is sort of backwards order, but what do you have marked for articulations? Let's not count slur.
Okay.
I have one.
I
Yeah,
have one.
I suspect it's in the same place.
Can we all start where we all start at the same time?
Okay? So that's our one articulation, is this one place. Obviously, we're not playing it.
Oh, we have a winner.
Oh.
From Andrew.
Okay.
Beethoven Opus 131.
There you
Yeah.
go.
So this is one of Beethoven's last string quartets. He starts with a fugue. He ends the previous quartet with a fugue, starts with this one with a fugue. So, of course, we're talking about voicing right away, right? We have the first entrance is here, second entrance here, not on the fifth. Viola, cello. Why is the cello last?
Why did the chicken cross the road?
I think
I can't climb into his head, but I know if I were wanting the music to gradually come into being, I would add the cello last, because particularly the lower range of the cello can have an outsized presence on basically I would call it the size of how something sounds. Yeah.
Can I dive into timbre with it?
you please.
So, let's, for the sake of demonstration, replace the word timbre with bow usage. All right? Because the way we achieve timbre is technically using our bow in different ways. Obviously, we have the fingerboard and we have the bridge and everything in between. So I'm gonna, if I play like this, can everyone see where my bow is being placed? Okay, I think I can do this and not hit my mic stand.
Do you
So-
want me to hold the score for you?
This is okay. So from my entrance, just notice how my bow moves.
You can't see it.
What?
Can't see it.
Oh, okay.
Don't just stand there. Just stand right there like this.
Fine.
I think I can play by memory. I'll hold it for you.
Let's see. Is this okay?
I didn't know if that was a joke.
Can you see?
Can you see that better? Like this.
This is high tech at its best. So I have a lot of traveling happen, and I exaggerated a little bit just to make the point. Here's what I have written in my part. I have no starting dynamic. I have hairpin crescendo, crescendo, sforzando, diminuendo. Then I have crescendo, 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 diminuendo to piano. So these are quite a few markings. That to me all translates to timbre, and the timbre translates to what the hell am I doing with my bow. So there is an example of how we take something like the dynamic, but really it's about quality of sound. And of course that's also happening while everyone else is playing, and I'm trying to think of who needs to cut through, or are we growing as a group. So this is a really dry version of showing that timbre translates to something for us. That is in the right hand. And obviously if you're aware of that as a composer, that gives you a lot more power in terms of what to expect from a string player or something that you write for a quartet.
There's another thing too, that it's the psychological aspect that we talk about. That I know, for example, starting this, whenever we perform this piece, feels like a bigger deal than it is. And part of it is, we're about to start, first of all, the baggage of a late Beethoven string quartet, but even just from the performance standpoint, a 40-minute, 7-movement piece with no stops, no breaks, they all continue on to each other. That sort of thing actually can have quite an impact on the way we think about it. It has to have a certain sound, I think. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's funny, because there's nothing written there, but, you know.
If you want to go on to the next example,
Let's
we're running out of time.
Okay, let's do last one.
Just a quick break to note that Kira has said, I can't climb into his head, Ryan's quotes, not with that attitude.
Oh!
Quick question, what's the difference between SF and SFZ for you all? That's the great question. You'll get a different answer from all of us.
We actually argue about this, so. I think my short answer is it's context-based.
Yeah.
Which doesn't give you an answer at all, so I'm really sorry about that.
Where does
Maybe we
this
can come
start
back to
again?
that. D.
Okay. So now, one last example before we get to questions. Again, thinking about all of the things that Jason has been unpacking.
One of you right now knows what we're about to play.
It's quick, it's dirty.
Close enough?
It's close enough. Just 1 second.
maybe it's worth saying first that this is a chunk from one of the pieces we're preparing for the concert next week by Andrew McManus.
This is the competition winning piece.
The competition winning piece called Pathways Bursting, Neurosonics 2. So we're missing some electronics in here. There are some electronics that start partway through that excerpt. But this is the quartet portion of it, at least. And I mean, we're talking extreme of all the stuff we talked about, right? These registered, huge, I mean, I don't know, Andrew, right? We were talking about this. I think this is the highest I've ever heard to play in a string quartet. And against the low,
This is actually the lowest I've ever.
and it's the
Oh,
lowest because of
yeah.
the scordatura and the cello. So
Yeah.
does that affect the timbre? Because for me, it really, really does. The way you have to play some of this stuff. I know it does for Ryan too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
This is the winner. It's a fantastic piece. I'm really excited for all of you to get to hear it. I want to unpack and just say that we had I don't remember the number of scores that we had. We had a lot of scores come in for this competition. For me, this was a very clear standout, this piece. And a lot of it ties to some of the things that we've been sprinkling into today. The timbre, the voicing, the articulation, yeah, those are all things that we're breaking down for you. But at the end of the day, those are all really inherent part of music at its core, which is expression and emotion and all of these things. Those allow those to happen.
And maybe just to take that further, it's just the idea that if you think of all of these as ingredients, you can have a set of really amazing ingredients that just don't quite work well together. You need the right combination to work. I know that's a really super reductive analogy, but that's sort of the same idea.
Part of that combination that makes it work and makes this piece so effective for me is that it's not just those basic things that we've broken down. There are other things. For instance, physics. One of the hardest things I think about composing is that if you're going from here or you're going from your computer, you don't get to make up automatically the time that it takes for sound to travel. There's a lot of latency in real life. From my brain telling my bow what to work, for the four of us to constantly be adjusting to the thicker string, the amount of time that the space takes. So all of these techniques can be an amazing concept, but if it doesn't make sense in a reality where it's going to be played, it changes what that piece is going to actually sound like and be like, and it's going to change our perception of what that piece could potentially be. So even from just the standpoint of looking at the score, this has a lot of articulation markings. It's very clearly has been thought through, and it's very, very difficult. But none of that stands in the way of it clearly being a good piece, because everything that's on the page looks purposeful and it looks thought out. Just like one of the reasons Beethoven I still think gets performed, even though it's so difficult, is there's nothing that's there for the sake of being difficult. That's just what it had to be to get that idea across. As opposed to using a bunch of articulations or a bunch of different timbres or these for the sake of creating complexity that doesn't allow the performer to inherently or quickly find that thing behind it. And of course, this is all subjective, but if we're talking about getting music performed, those things become a real serious. It's a part of it, especially like in a case like this one. How many pieces would you say we perform in a year?
Different pieces?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Could be about 30. Yeah.
It's about 30. Well, that's a lot. Sometimes we have to make decisions really quick about what we're going to play. And that's really my first judgment. I'd be curious to hear from you guys on this. My first judgment on the piece is the 30 seconds I take to do a quick flip through of the score. In that first 30 seconds, I've decided, am I going to look through it more carefully? And then that starts that step. Well, there's a lot of things I'm looking at to know whether or not that extra time is going to be invested, especially because we have limited time. What's it like for you guys? I'm curious.
In terms of
knowing if you want to go further into a piece to see if you want to
got it.
find more of it.
And then
If I don't have another reason to have experienced it beforehand from hearing performance or something like that, then it's very similar to what yours is. And I think that unfortunately it is, and I will say this, unfair.
Yeah.
It is unfair. I think all of us realize that.
Was your question pre
But-
or post being engaged to play it?
I guess
Does that
pre.
matter?
Yeah,
No,
pre.
Pre,
pre.
okay.
The reason I say it's unfair is we know that ideally you could give enough time to look through everything and find every gem, but the time is just always against it, right? We're always fighting that.
It's 3:35.
3:35. Yeah, I think we might move to questions. It can be about really, any of the stuff we talked about, or if you have other, more specific questions or other things you're wondering about. I have written down a few things that, smaller things that kept coming up in our rehearsals. If there are no questions, I can dive into this stuff. But yeah, I think questions would be great. We like questions.
I have a question about voice because I heard a lot when I was studying. What is your voice as a composer? And what interests me is when you were talking about the glass, you were saying, well, everyone knows glass. But then he's not giving you any instruction in the score. So what interests me is, do you feel like when you get a new piece, are you also trying to figure out who that person is? Or are you trying to figure out, I guess, their voice, which I think is kind of a different thing?
Can you say both?
Yeah, I think you can.
I think for me it's both. For me it actually starts with the second one you said, which is I only have this, and I'm thinking of it probably in such a different context than you have, having written it. It's not personal when we get it. For me. It's a set of instructions at its core. That's what it is, and I'm trying to figure it out. And then from there, I'm trying to glean things. What are those deeper things? And then I start wondering about the things you're talking about, meaning the person. I don't know if that's similar for you all or not, but it's probably a different answer for everybody.
We have the unfortunate circumstance of having to first be able to play a piece together, which means a lot of steps have to happen before we can start getting to that. But ideally, yeah, I think that's what we want. For the four of us, I think, or I'll say for me, I know for Jason, we talk about this stuff all the time. We want to know what is the intention of the composer, and part of that is their voice. And sometimes we're not allowed to get there by a matter of circumstance that, oh man, all energy in this piece needs to be on literally just staying together, and we don't have the time. But even in those situations, we're trying to find that.
Actually, it's one of the things I love about the festivals like this, or just any circumstance to meet the composer of the music you're playing, is you can talk to them.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. I mean, I probably didn't, it's maybe an unfortunate thing in the way pedagogy works around here, which is forever you play music by dead people, which, I love that music, and I love that too. I'm not knocking that at all, but it's a very, very different thing. As soon as you're playing, if we're playing something by Lansing, well, we can call him and talk to him. It's so different. I can never call Beethoven to ask about, what he meant by this, thing that I've thought all this time, and maybe you thought it's this really deep thing, and maybe, that was a mistake. It could be anything. So that is kind of, let me rephrase that. I really like that. I like that we can do that here.
Well, and a small second question then, especially with like the piece that you're playing by Andrew, is once you get something and you're adding it to your repertoire, is there a Bayo voice that also becomes part of the I see what I'm saying? Like there's Andrew's vision, but is there also a Bayo vision?
Absolutely. This is not this. Oh man, yes, we have a set of aesthetics that is very important to us, and regardless of what we're playing, if we have a week to learn a piece, if we have a year to learn it, it's, I think, almost always the exact same trajectory. And I suppose for us as performers, the real test of that is if it gets starting noticed by other people. We were in Vegas a year and a half ago. We did String Quartet number 6 by Richard Danielpour, and I remember we were out with him afterwards, and he was saying that he would love to hear us play Beethoven specifically, and more part of that presentation then became more about our particular aesthetics and what we bring out. And to me, that was great because, you're hoping that what your intentions are with music are coming through, and if someone can start talking about it, I think it means it is. I don't think that this, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, it's not a Bayo voice that gets in the way of what's already on the score. We're not trying to imprint ourselves on something that's not already there. I think part of what we want to do is take at its most sincere level what is on the page. It's not, we want to make this because we like playing this. It's not that. And even if it puts us in a zone of being uncomfortable for a while, we're okay with that. We have no problem admitting that. Sometimes maybe to myself, I have trouble admitting that. But
Yeah, I think this is so important for composers to realize. It's important to have the knowledge base of all the details you've been talking about. But it's also important to realize, you know, you're not a micromanager as well. And sometimes like players can really hate when you're trying to micromanage them. You know, one thing, I mean, I noticed you didn't talk about is bowings. And those can actually get in the way sometimes, unless you're doing something like, say, you want something to be all down bows. So micromanaging is not good. However, you do need to develop a happy medium where you're giving performers space to grow with the piece you are giving them, but you need to have, you know, everything lined up for yourself. You know, you've done all of your work to give the best possible product to the performer, to say, you know, this is what I am trying to communicate, and, you know, they're going to take it and they're going to do their thing using their own voice. So anyway, so yeah, you develop your own knowledge base, but, you know, it's not a form of micromanaging to, you know the intricacies of how they're going to interpret certain markings and other things like that. You should have those specifics in mind. And anyway, so I really appreciate this discussion. I think it's really, really important.
And, you know, Andrew, to be fair, I just, you know, we're always fighting time, so I knew we wouldn't get, I'd rather get a little more detail of each of these things. My number 4 thing written down here, guess what? Bowings. Just because it did come up quite a bit.
we were talking about it a little right before. Was it Ryan or Beaver? One of you three said how about maybe it's okay to treat a bowing like an articulation. Like Andrew's saying, if you want something specifically all down, but even a bowing becomes a
it's still personal. It's very personal.
Yeah, but it's like if you go through a score and it's like all down, up, down, it's like, okay, just that's what players do. Don't do that. Like
you know, on the fugue we played, it's already a very slow tempo. In the Beethoven, the excerpt we just played, but I have parts that are 3 measures slurred together. Well, it's just not doable. And even if you could do it, it would sound, nobody would want to listen to that. It would sound horrible. But, you know, there is a message in there also. I remember a quote, I think Mark Mellitz I've heard him say a few times, which is it's that relationship. This is sort of back to what you were asking about, Suzanne. It's sort of a triangle of what creates like the life of a piece, and one is the composer, one is the performer, and one is who's hearing it, the audience. And I totally think that's true. I really think that's true. You know, my wife, who's not a musician, well, she started violin a year ago for COVID, and she's on to Suzuki Book 2 now. Anyways, she loves playing this game where we listen to the radio and she says, "Who's playing?" And I'm pretty good at that game. If it's a violinist, because I know violinists, or if it's a string quartet, I have a pretty high success rate. And she thinks it's crazy, but it's not. It really isn't. I mean, to me, Beethoven is Beethoven. Like I'm good at identifying this is going to be Beethoven, but I also know Emerson Beethoven, and then I know a Takash Beethoven, and part of that's cheating because I've listened to that stuff. But part of it is, well, when you listen to them a lot, you realize there is a certain set of tendencies that each of these groups have that make up their sound or their identity, and you can start to pinpoint those in the same way that if I turn on the radio and I play you 1 second of Ivry Gitlis playing anything, all 3 of you are going to say, "Oh, that's Ivry Gitlis." You know, it's that sort of personal stamp, but it still sounds hopefully like the composer.
We have 1 minute.
We have 1 minute. Does anybody have any last
one question?
Short, easy question?
Kira says you can call Beethoven if you just believe in yourself.
Okay. I'll have to work on that, huh?
Yeah.
There's an extensive dream sequence in Arnold Steinhardt's book about Beethoven communicating about articulations.
Oh my
Is
gosh.
this the violin dream one?
I think I have it. Let me dig it out. It's a trip.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we miss about being all in person in Charlotte is that we have the option of running into each other in the hallways, grabbing a bite, getting to actually have the longer conversations about all of these things. In lieu of that, don't be shy. Email us. You can find any of our contact info, text, call, whatever. We want to be here to be part of the festival, even though we're all virtual right now. If you have questions or other things like that.
Also, I want to say one other thing before we go, which is I already told the people who've been working with us already know this, but Sean had a son just, was it 3 days ago? And so all of our rehearsals have been crazy and he's having to be rescheduled, and you're probably on like 1 hour of sleep. But thank you for making it.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here, Sean.
Thank you.
Anyways.
I think James has a question.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to ask, because I think about this a lot. What things outside of music do you find creeping their way into music? Because like I often find myself thinking of cooking a lot, even like before I like play something, because it's like, oh, and that's a little like bit weird as a question, but do you find like interesting intersections between non-musical material and then this? Yeah.
I feel like that's like been my life forever.
Yeah,
So.
that's why I looked at you right away. I was like, oh, this is gonna be my
Yeah, I mean, there's the obvious thing of in rehearsals, like we will often reference things as like parallels or analogies, as like descriptors, but also as like sources of inspiration, and like how that might, like even for Andrew's piece that we were talking about, like the fact that it is kind of mimicking a machine, like how does that influence how I'm playing it? Am I trying to phrase? Am I trying to be musical? Am I trying to be a machine, the exact opposite? And we have debates about all sorts of weird things that are like not musical at all, and I'm sure somehow that creeps its way into the way we perform as well.
And your first degree was in philosophy, right? Do you find that creeps in?
Oh. Probably, although I wouldn't say I'm like, oh, this reminds me of like
I was just,
a philosophical treatise or something. I mean, I've probably said that, but but no, not that directly.
The low-hanging fruit is art is life. I mean, the whole point of every note we play is to express something that we've experienced, whether it be up here or in real life. So I hope everything in some way relates to it, both for you as a composer and us as players. Because the more we experience outside of what we play, the more we can bring to it, and vice versa. The more we can experience things with our instruments and as a quartet, the more we bring that to other aspects of our lives. So I think at the for me the most base level, it all relates.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in and hearing us out, and we're glad to be working with some of you. Wish we could meet all of you and be in the same room also, and hear all of the pieces live.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we're here though.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for setting all this up as usual.
You.
Thank you guys for being here.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bayo, and thanks to everyone for coming.